Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney, and I am here with another Cashmerette Club pattern sew-along. And today's sew-along is for the Irving dress. This is the May 2025 pattern of the month for the Cashmerette Club, and I'm so excited to walk you through this beginner-friendly knit dress pattern. But before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to the University of Sewing. Everything that you are going to see me sewing today is done on this Bernina 790 Plus. That is a machine that is on loan to me from the University of Sewing, and I really appreciate that for these sew-alongs and tutorials. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this month's pattern. Like I mentioned, this is the Irving dress. This pattern features a fitted lined bodice that is a tank style bodice, and attached to that is a gathered ballet style skirt that has pockets. And then there is the option for the ties at the shoulders that give the illusion of a tie summer dress. These are not functioning, so they are just there for that illusion, which means you don't have to worry about any wardrobe malfunctions. As always, this pattern comes in the full Cashmerette size range and in the full cup size range as well. And as an added bonus, the bodice for the Irving fits all of the skirts for the Grafton, which is a knit dress pattern in Cashmerette's regular catalog of patterns. And the skirt of the Irving can go also on all of the bodices of the Grafton. So it's a mix and match bodice and extra skirt for that Grafton pattern, which gives you an infinite amount of knit dress options. I don't even know what else you would be looking for. What other options you could possibly want in a knit dress. Like I mentioned, this is a beginner-friendly pattern, so if you are new to sewing with knits, it's a fantastic place to start. For this project, we are going to want a knit fabric with at least 25% stretch. There is a little guide that is there in the pattern showing you how much fabric and how much it needs to stretch in order to make sure that you do have the correct amount of stretch percentage for this pattern. You can use any kind of light to medium weight jerseys. So this can be cotton spandex jersey. This can be viscose or a rayon spandex jersey. I am using a rib knit. This is a cotton modal spandex ribbed knit for this option. You are lining the bodice. You can use the same fabric for the lining of the bodice. For this project though, I have chosen a different fabric for the lining just so you can easily see what I am doing and tell a difference between when I'm using the lining versus the shell fabric for this dress. Additional things or options that you are going to want for this sew along. You are going to want a stretch needle for your sewing machine. This is a ballpoint needle, but not all ballpoint needles are great for stretch fabric. My favorite is the Schmetz stretch needle, and I am using a size 9 for this particular fabric weight that I am sewing with today. I am using regular all-purpose thread for this sew along, and you are also going to want some 3/8 of an inch wide elastic. This gets sewn into the waist of the skirt, helping not only to keep the waist sitting where it should, but also supporting the weight of the skirt as well. In addition, you also may want some sort of a seam roll or tailor's ham, and in lieu of that, maybe a rolled up towel or rolled up newspaper or a magazine with a towel wrapped around it. Just really helps with some of the pressing in the curved areas. All right, guys. If you want to get your hands on this pattern, let me tell you how to do that. So like I mentioned, this is May 2025's Cashmerette Club pattern, which means if you become a member of any of the tiers of Cashmerette's Club membership, you have access to this pattern here in May. However, if you're watching this video after May 2025, you will need to have the highest tier, which is the all access tier, in order to get access to this pattern. This pattern is included in all tiers of the Cashmerette Club membership. If you were getting it in May of 2025, after that, it is only available included in the all access tier. You definitely want to go. I've got a link down below. Go have a look at what is included in all of the tiers of Cashmerette's Club membership. This is something that I pay for my very own money. Absolutely worth it. They have so many coupon codes and Q&As and little master classes and all sorts of things that happen at that all access tier. So it's definitely something you're going to want to take a look at if you are interested in that sort of thing. All right, without further ado, let's head over to the cutting table and take a look at our pattern pieces, and then we're going to get started sewing. All right, so let's go through the pieces that we are going to need for our Irving dress. So the first thing, let's talk about fabric a little bit. Like I mentioned, I am using a cotton modal blend rib knit, and you want to make sure that you have that at least 25% stretch percentage, just at least. If it's got more, that's fine. Mine does have more, but you just want to make sure that your piece of fabric stretches according to that guide that is there in the pattern. Okay, so also, the pattern recommends just using the same fabric for the lining as you would for the main body of the dress, which I absolutely would have done, but I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing, so I did choose a different fabric for my lining so you can easily see when I'm working with lining versus the regular fabric. And for my lining, I've used just a rayon spandex jersey. But again, I could have very easily used the same fabric for my lining. I just want you guys to be able to see. Okay. First thing we need, piece 1. This will be piece 1A, B, or C, depending on what cup size you are choosing. I am doing this dress for Jenny, so we are doing the CD cup. So you need one of your main fabric cut on the fold and one of your lining fabric cut on the fold of that pattern piece. Then you need 2 pieces cut on the fold of piece number 2, which is your bodice back. Again, you need 1 piece cut on your fabric and then 1 on your lining. Those can absolutely be the same fabric, but you need 2 of those cut on the fold. Make sure you've marked all of your notches. And I like to mark the center, when I cut things on the fold, the center line there, just that can usually come in handy when we're sewing pieces together. Next is piece 3. This is the optional tie that we can use for the shoulder seams of the dress. And you're going to need 4 of these cut in main fabric. And I do have 4 of those cut. 2, 3, 4. Piece 4 is our skirt piece, and we need 2 of these cut on the fold. So this is our front skirt piece as well as our back skirt piece. And I have got 2 of these cut on the fold. Again, there's 1, there's 2. You're going to want to make sure that you've got those notches marked, especially where the pocket and stuff goes. I like to mark, like I said, center front, especially when we are doing the gathering that we will do to attach this skirt. So you need 2 of those. And then finally, you need 4 of piece 5, which are your pocket pieces. You can obviously omit the pockets if you'd like, but if you're putting pockets in, which I'll be doing, you need 4 of those pocket pieces. And that is the only pattern pieces that we need. This is a pretty simple dress. The other thing that we're going to need for this tutorial is a ballpoint or stretch needle. My favorite are the Schmetz Stretch, and that's what I will be using. A Schmetz Stretch needle, size 11, for my weight of fabric. You are also going to need 3/8 of an inch wide elastic for the waist seam. So I've got my 3/8 of an inch wide elastic for that. And then an option is using some fusible hem tape for the hem of the dress. So completely up to you if you want to use that. I will be using some hem tape. I'm using the So Keezy double-sided hem tape that I just really love. It just makes life so much easier. I'll show you how to apply that. And then finally, optional tool is a tailor's ham or a rolled up towel of some sort so that we can get some really good pressing in. And then safety pins come in handy as well. So those are everything that we're going to be needing. Let's go over to the sewing machine and start sewing. All right, so it's time to get started sewing. So for this first step, we're going to need piece 2, both our main bodice, sorry, we'll start with 1. That makes better sense, doesn't it? You're going to need your piece 1, whether that's A, B, or C, depending on what cup size you're using. You're going to need piece 1, both your main fabric and your lining fabric. And you're going to need piece 2, both your main fabric and your lining fabric. Now, before we take these
pieces off of our fabric. This can be, we're going to want to mark which one's the back, both for when the dress is finished and maybe you want to sew a tag into the back, or mark, if you don't like tags, mark it some way, stamp it, something in that back part so you can tell the back of the dress from the front of the dress. But while we are sewing, I just want to mark our both our lining piece and our outside bodice piece with a pen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark with a little pen through just one layer the back piece. And this is just going to make sure we don't get front and back mixed up as we start sewing. So I'm going to do that on both of these pieces. And I'm putting it on the right side of both. Okay, just like so. Okay, so now I know that these are the two back pieces. Now let's move our pattern pieces out of the way here for a second, because we actually need to trim our, on the lining. And remember, I've used different fabric for my lining just so it's easy for you guys to see which one I'm working with. So I'm actually gonna set the main bodice fabric, which are these two pieces, off to the side. And we're just going to be dealing with our lining pieces here for a second. We are prepping these for sewing. And what we're going to do, what the instructions want us to do, is to trim off 1/8 of an inch off of our armhole curves and our neckline curves, because we want our lining to be just a little bit smaller than the outside of our fabric. Now, you could absolutely take a seam gauge or a ruler and mark off with a pen, like a friction pen or something, where that 1/8 of an inch is, or you can absolutely eyeball it, which is what I tend to do. So how precise you're wanting to be is, it's completely up to you. We really just want the lining to be smaller than the outside. If you do not trust yourself to eyeball 1/8 of an inch, I would absolutely mark it in. And by doing that, we're just going to kind of go around and mark 1/8 of an inch. Okay, once we've marked our 1/8 of an inch in, and keep these folded because it just makes everything symmetrical. You do want to make sure that everything's lined up. We are just going to cut along those dotted lines. Just like so. And we're going to do that on the front and back of the lining only pieces. Don't touch the outside fabric, just the lining. So I'm going to do this on the lining, and then I'll meet you back, or on the front neckline and armhole, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, once we have trimmed our lining pieces at the neckline and armhole, it's time to sew our main bodice and our lining bodice together, right sides together. So this is the right side up of this fabric, and I'm going to put right side down here, and we're just going to match those shoulder seams. Just like so. And we're going to sew these at the shoulder seam. Now, you can sew this on your serger, absolutely, and just use your serger if you would like. I'm going to be doing all of this on a sewing machine though, so it's absolutely doable on a sewing machine. For the stitch though on this, instead of using a straight stitch, I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch at a 2.5 length and a 0.5 millimeter width. So it's a very narrow zigzag stitch, but we'll have some give there for in order for it to stretch with the fabric. So I'm going to sew at 3/8 of an inch both of these shoulder seams on the outer bodice as well as on my bodice lining. So let's go sew those shoulder seams together on both the bodice and the lining, and I'll meet you back here. All right, excuse me. Once we have got our shoulder seams here sewn, and as you can see, that stitch is, I mean, it almost looks straight, but it's not. It's a 2.5 length, which is a normal stitch length, but a 0.5 width. So it does go back and forth a little bit, giving that some stretch to go along with the stretch of the fabric. Okay, so once we have sewn both our lining shoulder seams and our bodice shoulder seams, we want to do a little bit of pressing, and we're going to press our bodice shoulder seams to the back. And I remember I marked my back with a pen so that I can easily figure out which way that is. So I'm going to give that a little press. And then on the lining, I want to press those shoulder seams towards the front so that when we sew this together here in just a second, those shoulder seams will be nested, meaning one will go one way and the other will go the other way. All right, once we've got those shoulder seams done, it is now time to sew our neckline. And I'm actually going to switch from pens to clips. I really like these clips with the knit fabrics. I don't know why, they just seem to work a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out my bodice here, right side up. So you can see this is the right side of my fabric. There's my little sleeve shoulder seams. And then this is my back because I've got my pin here at the back. And now I'm going to lay my lining over right side down, making sure there's my pen right here. So back to back, front to front. And like I said, those shoulder seams should be nested. So the main bodice is going towards the back and the lining is going towards the front. And again, remember, our lining is going to be smaller width-wise than our outside fabric because we trimmed that neck edge as well as those shoulder or armholes. So I'm just going to pop a couple pins in, matching our raw edges. We do want to match those raw edges. Trimming that lining is just going to help it, the fabric, pull towards the right side or pull towards the lining side when we have completely finished so that we can't see lining on the right side of the bodice. Okay, now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and I'll take you with me and we're going to sew this neckline, that bodice or that outside fabric and lining together at right sides together at the neckline. So let's go do that. All right, so now it's time to sew our neckline. Now I have, real quick, here in the back, because I remember I marked my back with those pins, I have pinned in a tag, sandwiched a tag right there in between my lining and my fabric so that when, you could baste it in place too, but when I sew around this, it will catch that tag in that seam. Or if you have a tag that doesn't get caught in a seam that sits like this, you could go ahead and sew that onto your lining first before you sew it, before you sew this neckline seam, just so it's just sewn on the lining. Or you could put a stamp in at the end. Anything that you want to do, whatever your preference is for marking the back. But I just wanted to make note of that. All right, I'm going to start sewing at one of these shoulder seams. And I'm sewing with the main bodice of my, or the main fabric of my bodice up. And we are just, again, with that 2.5 length, 0.5 width zigzag, we are just going to sew all the way around our neckline. Here's that tag, so I'm just going slow over that. All right, so we have got our neckline all sewn. all the way around. Now we're going to go and we're going to clip into this neckline all the way around, and we are clipping through the curved areas mainly, but to, but not through that stitch line, about, I don't know, every half of an inch or so. And we're going to go all the way around the neckline doing this, and then we're going to understitch. Okay, once we've clipped all the way around that neckline, to but not through, we're now going to understitch, and understitching is sewing this seam allowance to the lining, basically. So away from the main fabric and to the lining. So we'll be sewing with right side up, and we'll be sewing that seam allowance is all pushed there to the right. We're now going to be sewing that. So let me get this under the machine and we will do that. Okay, so I have got my lining and my main bodice pulled apart here. Lining on this side, main bodice on this side, and I'm making sure that that seam allowance is all going towards that lining. And I am just going to go around, pulling slightly at that seam to make sure it's lying flat, starting at one shoulder seam, and sewing on the lining side, but stitching those down together. And as I go, I'm just making sure that that seam allowance underneath is in fact pointing towards the lining side and going all the way around. Okay, once we have understitched to the lining side, let's go over to the ironing board and give it a good press. All right, so we're going to give this neckline a really good press. And I went ahead and removed my pins that indicate what's the back because I've got a tag in there now. So basically we're just going to be going around the neckline and making sure that the outside fabric is rolling just towards the inside. So press this with the lining up. I mean, we don't want too much of the right side of the fabric showing, but just a little peek there is what we want. And it helps to have a ham or a rolled up newspaper towel for this part as you go. Okay, once we have pressed that neck edge, it is time to finish our armholes via the burrito method. So I am going to zoom out here so you can see what's happening. I have got my bodice right side up here with my lining against my table and the main fabric up, okay? We're going to be rolling into a burrito. Now this can be a little tricky because we're dealing with some narrow shoulders here and we've got to get everything wedged into this little area, but it will work, I promise. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at one side. It doesn't matter which one. And we're going to roll. Roll, roll, roll. Nice and tight. Our lining as well as our outside bodice until we make it over here. Oops. to our shoulder edge, okay? So once our little roll is sitting on top of our shoulder, like so, we're going to take our shoulder, and I'm separating the lining. This is the underneath shoulder part, okay? This underneath shoulder part. And we're going to take our lining, what's left of the lining here, separating it from the outside fabric, and wrapping it around, basically creating a burrito. So the whole of the other strap and everything are all inside this little tube here at the armhole, and then obviously as we get lower, it's the bodice part, and we're going to pin our armhole together. So our lining and our main fabric are right sides together. I will show you this again, how to roll it and pin it again on the other side in case that was confusing. But my lining that matches this underside is now right sides together. And you may have to do this a couple of times, you know, roll it, re-roll it, to kind of get an understanding of what's happening here. But we really just want to make sure that that all of the dress or the bodice that's inside there is pushed as far to the back as possible, because we don't want to catch that when we're stitching. All right, so now we've got this weird little pocket looking thing, but we're going to go to the machine, and I'll take you over there with me, and we're going to stitch at 3/8 of an inch this entire armhole from one side seam all the way over to the other, the start of the side seam. We're not stitching the actual side seam yet. Okay, so let's go stitch that down real quick. Okay, so now we're going to sew our first armhole. This is I'm sewing with my main fabric up and my lining against the feed dogs at 3/8 of an inch with that same stretch stitch we've been using. And we just want to go slow, especially as we get up to this actual strap, because this is where it can get, we don't want to accidentally sew anything that we don't mean to sew. So if that means sticking your finger in between those two layers and kind of pushing it out of the way, then that's what we want to do. The bulkiest part here should be right at the actual seam. Okay, so I think we're good. I don't think I can feel we've caught anything. So the next thing we want to do, and then we'll go over and pull this right side out, is we want to take our scissors, and just like we do with the neckline, we want to clip to but not through that seam, especially at the curves. Make sure we're not clipping anything we don't want to clip. We don't really need to do it here at this straight part of the armhole because it's pretty straight. And come back down here where it's the curve. Just like so, okay? So let's go back to the ironing board, and we will turn this right side out. I'll show you how to pull it right side out, and then we'll do the other side. All right, so we've got this weird little cocoon that we're needing to pull right side out. And depending on how thick your fabric is how difficult this is going to be. So we actually want to start, and we want to start from the front. This is the back, so I'm going to flip this. Because the back is a little less bulky than the front. So I'm actually going to take my hand in between these layers, and you've got your roll that you made, and I'm going to carefully pull, kind of like you're threading elastic, you know, when you're pulling it through and you're pull. We just want to be careful that we don't pop any stitches. So sometimes that can just be a very, just going slowly. And sometimes it can mean a lot of carefully shimmying this area because it's going to get bulkier before it gets better. Okay, and then finally it pops out. Just go slow with that, guys, because that is a very narrow area here that we're pulling the bulk of that fabric out, especially if you've got bulkier fabric. So just be patient. It's okay. All right, so now we're going to set this up just like we set it up before, except this time this side armhole is finished completely. We will press this here at the end. Ooh. Didn't mean to drop those. All right, but this time, let's lay everything out again. And I will zoom out. Nice and even here for the other side. So we'll go through this one more time. So now we're gonna start here at the top and we're gonna start rolling our lining with our outer fabric on this outside side. And a nice tight little burrito, if you will. Okay, and then once we get over to this other armhole side, again, you know, we've not sewn this yet, right? So we've got our top layer and then there's our lining. So we want to lay this on top of that top layer, and now we're going to take the lining that's underneath here and flip it the opposite way. So that now it can come over right sides together. And we're just concerned with the armhole area, not the side seams. But we're going to go from one side to the other, especially there in that little strap area. We just want to make sure that that fabric is pushed as far to the back part as possible. We don't want to accidentally grab that stitch on that when we're sewing that seam. And you can use pins or clips, up to you. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'm going to do the same thing I did to the other side. I'm going to stitch this whole armhole at 3/8 of an inch. Then I'm going to clip into it, clip to, but not through that stitch line. And then I'm going to pull it through the same way, grabbing from the front and pulling the back to the front and easily, you know, scooch, scooch, scooch that, especially right here through that strap. You know, as the fabric starts gathering too much, that can cause extra bulk that we don't want, and they can cause stitches to pop, so we don't want that. So just be very careful, gradually scooching, scooching, scooching until we get that pulled right side out. So I'm going to go do that, and then when I come back, we're going to do some pressing. All right, once we've got both sides nice and clean finished, we are going to give each armhole a little press, just like we did with our neck edge, but this time it's the armhole. So you should be able to see a little bit of the main bodice fabric on the lining side. Okay, so once we have got this nice, clean, finished bodice, it is time to do our side seams. Okay, so side seams are pretty easy. I'm going to turn this to the side and we're going to do one together here. So I'm just going to be taking, so I've got my bodice, you know, like it'll be worn. This is the front, this is the back. And I'm going to take my shell fabric here and put it together, right sides together. And then my lining sides should also be right sides together. And you've got notches there that you can match. And we want to make sure that that seam allowance is going towards the lining. Not towards the shell fabric. All right, and now we're going to just sew this in one continuous step from the bottom of the shell fabric all the way through, making sure that that seam allowance goes towards the lining, down through the lining to the hem of the lining in one seam at 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go sew that real quick and I'll be right back. All right, so we've sewn that in one long line. Now we can put our shell fabric back down over our lining fabric. And we can give that all a really good press. I want to press that seam allowance, that side seam, but also really good there at that underarm. Okay? And there we have got one completely finished side seam. Now we need to do the other side. So do the other side the same way. And then the final step that we can do with our bodice, if you'd like, and it would probably make life a little bit easier, is use the sewing machine and just baste around the hem, baste that lining and bodice together at the hem. So I'm going to do all of that and then sew the second side seam and then baste my shell fabric and my lining fabric together at the bottom of this bodice. And then I'll meet you back here for the next step. Okay. So we now have a completed bodice. Now we just need a skirt to attach to it. So we can actually set this aside for now. I have basted the bodice and the shell and the lining together at the bottom of the bodice here. So we can set this aside for now. Our next step is going to be doing the ties. And this is optional. You can use the ties if you want. If you don't want, that's fine too. You can also have them removable. You know, you can tie them if you want them on there or leave them off if you want them off. Your options are endless. So anyway, you want piece 3, which is the tie, and you should have 4 of these cut. So we just need 2 of them, 2 per side. So I'm going to set these 2 over here. We don't need those quite yet. And we want to put these right sides together. So that is right side up and that is right side down. And we want to leave a gap of about 1 inch. Somewhere in the skinny part is fine. I'm going to mark that with red clips so that we can turn it right side out. So in between these 2 red clips, I want to leave that unsewn. All right, so I'm going to start stitching at this red clip and I'm going to stitch all the way around until I get to this red clip. Make sure you back stitch or lock stitch or whatever at the start and stop. So I'm going to really quickly sew around this piece and then I will come back here and we will clip it and get it turned right side out. All right, so you can see where I where I started my line of stitching here and then went all the way around and then stopped it here. So I've got a 1 inch gap here in that strap, in that tie. All right, we just want to take some scissors and we just want to clip off some of the bulk there especially at the point of those ties, like so. And now we're just going to turn this right side out. And the instructions say to use like a point turner to get those points out there. I actually use a bamboo double pointed knitting needle, or you could use a chopstick, or a unsharpened pencil works. All right, so I'm just going to take this double pointed needle and just kind of run it along that seam line a little bit. You don't want to poke through your fabric. And then there's two options for closing up this hole. You can, number one, hand sew it, which is what I'm going to do, or you can just top stitch around the whole tie piece. I just like the cleaner look, especially because I've used a rib knit fabric here, the cleaner look that the hand sewing is going to do. So first I'm going to give this a press. Like so. Then I'm going to take some thread and thread a needle. And I'm going to double up my thread. So I've pulled it through and I've got 2 ends here at this end. Give it a knot. And then I got to find my hole. Well, there it is. It's like easier said than done. All right, there's the hole there in my side seam. And here, I'll zoom in on this. I'm just going to take my needle down here and take a bite, so I'm down inside that seam so I can bury that tail. And then just going to do a ladder stitch. So I'm going to take a bite on this side and then a bite on that side. Pull it through. And then once I've got that closed, I'm just going to take a bite out of where I just came out to make a loop. And then I'm going to go through the loop 1 time, 2 times, pull it taut, and then bury that knot. Boop. And then cut off my tails. And then we can give it another good press. And then we can set these aside, and these can be used to tie on to those straps to look like the straps are tied or left off, up to you. All right, so do that with the other tie, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, we've got our bodice all put together. Now it is time to tackle our skirt before we can attach them. Put them together. All right, so you're gonna need piece 4, which is your skirt. And you should have 2 of these cut out on the fold. One is the front and one is the back. It doesn't really matter because they're identical, but that is how that goes. And then piece 5, which is your pocket, and you should have 4 of these. I guess technically your pocket is optional. You don't have to put the pocket in if you don't want, but we will be putting it into this one, okay? So those are the pieces we're gonna be messing with. For this demonstration, I'm only gonna need 1 pocket piece though, and 1 of the skirt fronts. We can set these pattern pieces aside. Okay, so we're going to be doing this on both skirt front and skirt back, but I'll just be demonstrating on one of them. but we'll be doing this 4 times. Okay, so this is the top of my skirt. This is center front or center back, it doesn't matter. This is the top. So I am gonna set this way. And this is obviously right sides up. And I'm gonna take my pocket piece, and I did not grab the correct pocket piece. And I'm going to put it right side down, aligning it up here at the top, and your notches on your pocket should match the notches that are on the skirt, okay? So we're just going to clip those together. Okay. Now we are going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew this pocket to the skirt at this side seam here at 1/4 of an inch, not 3/8, but 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to sew that together. Okay, so let me go do that, and then I'll be right back. All right, so I've sewn that seam at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, not 3/8. Sewn that pocket. Now at this time, if you are wanting to finish off your seam allowances, you can totally do that now. I'm using a knit that doesn't fray, so which most knits don't, so I don't need to finish off that seam allowance. But if you are finishing off seam allowances, now is a good time to do the side seam, okay? The next step is that we're going to take our pocket and we're going to fold it away from the skirt, and we want that seam allowance going towards the pocket. Just give it a little press like so. You can flip it over. We just want to make sure that that seam allowance is in fact going towards the pocket piece away from the skirt. All right. All right, now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine, and I'm going to understitch that seam. So I'm going to sew on the pocket about 1/16 of an inch away from that seam line, but sewing that seam allowance to the pocket piece. So let me go do that real quick, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so now the pocket is attached and it's been understitched. As you can see, that little line of stitching right there on the pocket side. So now we're going to do that same thing to the other side of this skirt piece, and then to the other 2 pocket pieces onto the second skirt piece. So go ahead, get all 4 of those pockets sewn on, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've got 2 skirt panels, both of which have the pockets attached here to the sides. So we're going to lay those on top of each other, right sides together, with our pockets matching. And starting at this outside edge, we are just going to clip or pin those pockets together. Making sure that you're matching your notches on your skirt. There's one there. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to start sewing here at the edge of the pocket all the way down around to this point, and then down our hem, all the way down to our hem, okay, at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we'll do this one together. I'm going to go ahead and also, I just want to make sure that the tops of my pockets, that these seams are aligned, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and pop a pin in there. We're not sewing across this area. We're sewing starting here and going down, around, and up. I just want to keep that in place to keep everything nice and lined up. So, and it'll make sense when we're finished sewing this next seam. So we're going to do that, and we're doing this obviously on both sides. I'm just going to show you on one side. We're obviously doing the same thing on both sides. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew this seam. We're starting here at this top of the pocket piece at 3/8 of an inch. and we're sewing around the pocket. We want to make sure those raw edges match up as good as possible here. Up on this pocket. And then once we get to the side seam, we want to make sure that that seam allowance stays pointing towards the pocket that we understitched. Okay, so we've got that side seam sewn now. Now, obviously, you can, well, not obviously, but you can now go and finish this seam that you just sewn if you are using a finishing technique. Again, I am not, because my fabric doesn't fray. So I am not going to be finishing that off, but you can now go and finish off this seam allowance however you're finishing that. But before we move on, remember we pinned our two pocket pieces together. We want to sew from the top down to, see that notch? Down to that notch at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now this seam is at that 1/4 of an inch, so we are sewing just right inside of this seam line on the skirt side. This is the skirt side, this is the pocket. So we're going to sew all the way down and then back stitch again at that first notch that's right there. Okay? It's going to keep that pocket in line. And I'm sewing just to the left. Just to the left of that previous stitch line. So see, from the top down to that first notch. Okay? All right, do that same thing on the other side, and I'll meet you back at the pressing station. All right, so I've got my skirt, my side seams are sewn. You can finish those off like I mentioned if you want to. And I've stitched down here at the top down to the notch there at the pocket on both sides. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew some basting stitches and on the front and the back. We do not wanna get any basting stitches on the pocket pieces. So we'll be starting and stopping at the side seams. So I'm gonna do 2 lines on the front, 2 lines on the back with nothing at, the side seams, nothing on the pockets, okay? So the instructions want you to do a long line, and I like to do like a 5mm stitch length. It's just a straight stitch. This is not a zigzag stitch, just a straight stitch, 5mm, nice and long that we can easily gather. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start, instead of doing 2 separate lines, I actually do just 1 long one and kind of box it off at the end. So I'm gonna start at one side seam. I'm gonna sew all the way to the other side seam, stitch down 1 and stitch all the way back. That way you don't accidentally pull the threads out on one end. All of your threads that you're pulling are located on one end. And then I'm gonna do the same for the back piece, okay? And I'll take you over and show you how I'm gonna do that. So let's go sew in our gathering stitches. Okay, so I've got my machine on a straight stitch and I have put it at a 5mm stitch length. And I am just gonna start right here at this side seam. Oh, and my machine automatically cuts thread and also automatically locks the stitch before it goes. So I need to turn that off. Okay, so we're gonna start first by, I think it said an 1/8. Yeah, an 1/8 and a half. I mean, an 1/8 is really close to the edge. We can pull these out at the end. So I am just going to sew from one side seam all the way to the other. All right, when I get to the second side seam, right about there, I'm gonna raise my presser foot, pivot, stitch down, maybe 2 stitches, pivot again, and now I'm gonna come back the way I just went. All right, and then when we get to the end, raise my needle, raise my presser foot, cut my threads. Just like so. All right. So now I've got 2 lines of basting stitch on the front that we can easily, well, I got pulled to the back, but we'll pull that back up to the front. Pull these to gather this to fit the bodice. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other side of the skirt, not getting any of the pocket pieces on, and then I'll meet you back at the ironing board so we can pin this into the bodice. All right, so we've got our 2 lines of basting stitches on both the front and back of the skirt. So now we need our bodice. It doesn't really matter which is the front or the back of our skirt here, but once the bodice is in, then we will have a front and a back to our skirt. So my skirt is currently wrong side out. This is the right side here on the inside, okay? And I'm going to take my bodice that is also right side out, which is right here, and we're going to put it upside down because we're attaching the bottom part of the bodice to the top part of the skirt here. And I'm going to put my bodice inside my skirt, okay? Like so. And I am going to pin my side seams of my bodice to the side seams. We are leaving the pockets completely out of this right now, okay? It will make sense at the end. I'm just going to pin my side seams. Get some of those basting stitches out of the way. Pin the side seams over this side. Just making sure I'm not getting that pocket piece caught. So we're going to be sewing the bodice to the skirt in 2 passes. All right, now I notched center front and center back of my skirt as well as my top. So I'm going to match, and remember that that bodice shell and lining are being used as one now. And then the same with the center back, and I have a notch here at the center back. I think that's right. I think that's back. I may be saying that backwards. Yes. All right, now you'll notice that our bodice is much smaller than, we have a lot of extra room in between points here, if you will, which is fine because we are going to gather. So I'm just going to start, we'll start on this side here. I've pinched my gathering stitches in here, so let me unpin that real quick so I can get to those. All right, and I'm just going to pull, oh my gosh, did I pinch it again? There we go. I'm just going to pull my basting stitches on one side, just start pulling them, moving them down the line. I find that it is so much easier if we over gather. So in other words, making the skirt smaller than, I'm actually going to take this pin out that's marking center for a minute so I can move that all the way down. I like to over gather, basically making the skirt smaller than the bodice, and because I find it easier to get more even gathers when you then let it back out. All right. So see, I've now made this front skirt way smaller than the bodice. There's that center. And I'm looking, there's my center. There's my center. Okay, marking my centers again. All right, now I can start at this end, which is the end not with the gathering stitches, and slowly just start evening those out a little until this section equals. You may have to pin and unpin that center spot a few times. Sometimes those gathering stitches don't want to move. And then once you get where you're pretty comfortable with that gather, then you can go ahead and pop in a few more pins. So we're going to do this for each of the 4 sections. So you've got, you know, side seam to center front, and then center front to the other side seam, and then the 2 passes on the back as well. So let's get these all pinned in place, and then I want to talk you through this before we sew it down. All right, once we have got that all pinned in place, again, we're ignoring the pockets. The pockets are just floating out here. That's fine. They're going to get anchored here in a minute. We're going to start at one side seam, not sewing our pockets down, and sew across to the other side at 3/8 of an inch. And then we're going to back stitch, and then start again on the other side of the side seam and sew to the other side seam, back stitch again, leaving that pocket piece unstitched, okay? So let's go to the machine and sew that, and we want to use our stretchy stitch again. So back to that zigzag that is 2.5 millimeters long, 0.5 wide. So let's get that waist seam sewn real quick, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, now that we have our bodice and our skirt attached, we can remove our basting stitches from our skirt. So I've got these really long tails here. And what's nice is that because we did that little box, you can come down here on the opposite side and unpick the, you know, 1 or 2 stitches that you did going down. And then these stitches pull out pretty easily. And you will have 2 little holes, you know, at your side seams because we haven't secured that pocket down, but don't worry, we'll get there. Okay, I'm going to cut this side as well real quick, and then we'll go inside the skirt. Pull out the rest of those basting stitches. Okay, once you've gotten all those basting stitches removed, let's go back and turn everything the way we just had sewn it, with our bodice down inside of our skirt. Now we need to determine which is the front, and this side is the front because I can see my tag is back here. So let me turn it over this way. Let's put our front up. So now that we have everything sewn, we want to take our pocket pieces that we haven't been sewing, and we're going to push them to the front, and we're going to line them up with that waist seam that we just sewed. And we're going to pin those in place. Okay. And now I'm going to go back to the machine, and I'm going to stitch these pockets. So I'm going to start where I stopped here on the back and continue on. And I'll probably just continue on the front, to be honest, and then sew the pocket here and then stop where I stopped on the back on this side. Okay, so let's go over and do that. All right, so this is where I stopped on the back. You can see my line of stitching that stopped right there. That is where we are going to start. Making sure that those raw edges line up there at the waist. Now I'm stitching on the previous stitch line. Now I'm on the other pocket. And I will stop at the back where that line of stitching stopped. Got some more basting I can remove here. All right, once we have done that, our bodice and our skirt are connected. You can now go through and finish this seam allowance if you would like. Again, I'm not finishing mine because this doesn't fray, but completely up to you. So finish this off if you'd like, and then I'll meet you back at the ironing board. We're going to talk about putting the elastic in. All right, the next thing we're going to do is add elastic to the waist. This is going to help, number one, keep the waist kind of cinched in, but also help anchor. The weight of that skirt can get kind of heavy when you've got stretch fabric. It's just going to keep everything in place. So I've got my piece of 3/8 of an inch elastic that I have cut 1 inch smaller than Jenny's waist. This dress is for Jenny, not for me. So I've cut it 1 inch smaller than her waist, okay? Which is what the instructions ask you to do. So now we're going to overlap this by 1 inch. The ends here at 1 inch, and I'm just gonna put a clip here. You could pin it. So now we've got basically one big continuous loop. Let me find which side's my back. This is my back. Okay, so I'm gonna pin this about center back on top of that seam allowance. Basically gonna quarter it now because I have a feeling this is gonna be a little smaller than the current waist of the dress. Not a lot, but a little. And we are also pinning this on the skirt side, not the bodice side, because our seam allowance is going to get pressed. I'm just quartering it is what I'm doing. I'm pulling this here, pulling this taut, and I know this is going to be the side seam. The seam allowance is going to get pressed down towards the skirt, and we don't want the elastic to necessarily show. Although if you want to cover up your elastic completely, she does put in some ideas on how to do that, basically wrapping it with fold over elastic or with fabric from the shell of your dress for the main bodice. So it's a little bit smaller, as you can tell. You know, I've got a little bit of stretching that I'm going to do to get that in there. But now we're going to go back to the sewing machine and sew in the elastic, zigzag stitch the elastic in onto the seam allowance. So let's go over and do that. All right, so I'm actually going to turn this dress kind of the other way here. So we can start, it doesn't really matter where we're starting. Actually, you know what? I do. I want to start where that is overlapped, just so we don't pull anything loose. So I'm going to start where I've overlapped that elastic here at center back. Okay, and I have put this, I've made my zigzag wider. So I have, sorry, I'm making sure that this doesn't move here. I've made my zigzag stitch it's still 2.5 length, but I've made it a 3 width just to cover a little bit more of the elastic. So I have got my elastic, and it is, there, that's that area. It is literally riding in between my seam allowance line here where I attach bodice to skirt and the raw edge. And I'm just gonna very lightly stretch this elastic as we sew, making sure that the left edge of that elastic is in the seam allowance and doesn't go down over that seam line. Okay, so now we've got that elastic sewn in to our waist. Let's go over and we've got some pressing to do. Okay, so we can pull everything out now. I mean, the dress is inside out, but our bodice can be pulled out of the skirt now. And what we want to do is we want to do some pressing. We want to press our seam allowance down towards the skirt. I've got that seam roll in between layers. Obviously, had I finished off this seam allowance of the waist, this would, you know, I wouldn't have curling happening here. Okay, the other area that we want to press right now is our side seams. We want to press our side seams toward the front of our skirt, which our pockets are already going to make that want to go towards the front. So let's press those side seams towards the front. Okay, you're going to do the same to the other side. Also try on your dress and let's determine the hem. We're going to be putting a 1-inch hem in this, so determine if you want to cut it a little bit or you know, raise it a little bit, or if it's good as is. And then I'm going to meet you over here and show you how I like to do hems on knits. All right, so now we are ready to do our hems. So here is the hem of my dress. This is the wrong side facing up. I like to use a product called this So Keezy double-sided fusible stay tape. It's hem tape basically, because it's 1 inch wide. It's a product I really love. But you could use anything. You could use a Steam-A-Seam. You could use a Wonder Under, whatever double stick tape that you really like. I am going to basically start. Actually, let's start at this side. Go this way. I'm going to start at one side seam, and I'll put it over the side seam just to keep that tacked down, and I'm ironing it into place. This has a little bit of a curve to it, this skirt, not a ton though, since it is a gathered skirt. There's a paper backing on this that I'm ironing on. So let's iron this in place. I'm actually just going to go all the way around. A lot of times I break it at the side seam for smaller pieces, but we're going to live on the edge and just keep going all the way around the hem here. Okay, once we've gone all the way around, I'm going to cut it. Iron down that last little bit. And I'm going to give it just a second to cool. All right, so I'm going to start here. And I really actually like to start, I'll pull both ends up. It just makes life much easier when you're coming around the horn here. So I'm going to pull back a little bit. And what I love about this is it makes a perfect 1 inch hem, because we're just going to fold it right at the edge of that glue. And I'm actually going to start in a little bit. Move those scissors. And I'm just going to go little by little. So that I don't accidentally press something I don't mean to. Like that. There we go. And it makes it really easy because this is 1-inch wide tape. So you know you're getting a 1-inch wide hem all the way around. And not only does it glue your hem in place, it does wash out, but not only does it glue things in place, it acts as a little bit of a stabilizer when you are either using your twin needle or if you're doing a cover stitch hem. It gives it just a bit of stability, that glue does, so you don't get tunneling as badly. Sorry, the dress is wanting to pull off the table here. Fabric's got some rayon in it, which means makes it heavy. Okay. Now you've got a perfectly pressed up hem. So now you've got a couple of options. You honestly could use a straight stitch on this hem and just straight stitch your hem because this hem doesn't need to stretch, so it's not gonna pop the stitches. So it's completely up to you. You could use a twin needle if you do want a little bit of stretch, or you could use a cover stitch machine, which is my preference when it comes to knits. You could do a decorative hem. You could do a decorative stitch on your hem, however you'd like to hem this up. It's absolutely up to you. So go ahead and sew that up now that it's nice and glued in place. Go ahead and sew that up now, and then I'll meet you back and we're finished with our dress. All right, so now we have our finished Irving dress. There's our little tag there in the back. We've got our pockets that are in and functioning. And then I have finished off, I did a cover stitch on my hem, but again, you could finish that off any way that you want. That hem tape is super handy. Now we've got our optional ties here that you can now take if you want and give those a good little tie over your shoulder seams. And it gives this dress a fun little picnic vibe. So you can omit these, you can keep these, totally up to you. But there we go, our finished Irving. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions and I am happy to answer those. Happy sewing.
So there we have it. We now have our finished Irving dress. Like I said, a very beginner-friendly knit dress pattern and such an easy wear as we get into the warmer months because our ties are detachable. Very easy to layer this under or over maybe a fitted knit top or another tank if you want to go kind of early 2000s vibe, or very easy to layer under things, whether that be a jacket or a cardigan or a button-up shirt that you're tying, whatever the case may be, a fantastic wardrobe staple for the upcoming warmer months. As a reminder, you have access to this pattern on all tiers of the Cashmerette Club if you are purchasing that membership or have that membership during May of 2025. After May of 2025, you are going to have that all access tier membership in order to have access to this pattern, but it is a really, really good one. And it mixes and matches with all of the bodices and skirts for the Grafton. And I honestly can't think of any knit dress that you would want to create that you can't with those building blocks. I hope you have enjoyed this sew along. And as always, if you have any questions, please leave them down below. I don't want anyone to have any unanswered questions, and I'm happy to answer those. So leave those in the comments down below. All right, guys, thank you for joining me for this sew along. I'll see you all again next time. Bye.